Hello everyone, I'm Savita Vaidyanathan. Welcome to everyone to our speaker series. Today's topic is housing, a spotlight on Cupertino. We are here to discuss the housing crisis in Cupertino and the Silicon Valley region as a whole. Our region houses many of the world's largest high-tech corporations, including Apple, right here in Cupertino. According to a recent report by the Silicon Valley Competitiveness and Innovation Project, our housing prices and commute times are amongst the highest in the world. Today, the average median home in Cupertino is more than $1.8 million, and the average rent is above $3,000. As a result, many households struggle to afford daily living in our community. The city of Cupertino and I personally supported Measure A, the successful $1 billion housing bond passed by voters in November 2016, meant to contribute to the solution of the housing crisis. However, the issue still remains, and we need to continue to work together to find solutions. Here are some statistics. Currently, there are only a little over 1,000 homes listed for sale on MLS in the Santa Clara County. Of those homes, only 30 are in Cupertino, and only 5 are listed below 1 million. As I said before, the median house value is over 1.8 million, which means you will need to make at least $7,000 in monthly installments, depending on how much you put as down. This is assuming 20%. The average rent for an apartment in Cupertino is over $3,000. A family needs to earn at least $125,000 a year in order to afford this rent. Studio apartments are a little lower. Silicon Valley statistics, we have a population of over 3 million and an area of 1.8 square miles, and the average annual income is $125,000 plus. City of Cupertino, BMR, the below market rate housing program, is really very good. We try to address it in as many ways as possible, reach as many people as possible. But the statistics that I have is 142 rental units for low income and 120 ownership homes for moderate income. We need to do better. I really want to thank the staff for putting together these statistics. Please wave. Give them a round, please. Thank you so much. With that as a background, I would like to introduce our moderator. This panel discussion will be moderated by Olson Lee. Olson is a former director of the San Francisco Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development and retired in 2017 after 27 years of service. Among his many accomplishments, Mr. Lee received the 2010 Distinguished Public Official Award from the Nonprofit Housing Association of Northern California. Mr. Lee graduated from UC Berkeley and the University of Maryland, College Park. I would like to thank Mr. Lee for being here to moderate. I hand it over to you to introduce the video and then to introduce the panel. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. As the mayor said, I retired after 27 years of service to the city of San Francisco. And I sort of feel right at home here when you told me about the median, sales price was, as well as the average rent. I guess misery loves company. I was in New York City for a conference at the Ford Foundation, and I was jumping into a cab on the way from the airport to the Ford Foundation, and the cab driver said, "So, what do you do?" I said, "I'm the director of housing for the city of San Francisco, and I build affordable housing." And the cab driver, without skipping a beat, said, "You must not be doing a very good job." So to dispel that rumor, the city of San Francisco, not me personally, but just a wonderful team of individuals, what I always call the entire ecosystem, and that's what you really need to create affordable housing. There is over 27,000 units of affordable housing in some manner or form in the city of San Francisco. A little bit over, somewhere between 5 and 7% of the housing stock in San Francisco. It's obviously not enough, but you got to start somewhere. And I think this is part of why the mayor wanted to have this discussion to talk about how do we start to support and to develop affordable housing and more housing in our communities. And what does it really take? So to understand sort of the intricacies of how to build both market rate housing and affordable housing. Affordable housing issue is not just a Cupertino issue, it's not just a San Francisco issue, it's a California issue. You talk to communities all up and down the coast, there is a great unaffordability of housing, there's a great demand for even market rate housing. It is a problem that we need to face. And the panel will talk a little bit about some of their efforts to create both market rate and affordable housing, and also talk about sort of the obstacles and the support that we all need to give to be able to create affordable housing and more housing. Because it's not just the question it's a question not only of creating housing for people who are here today, but for our economy and our state to continue to grow and prosper. We need to be able to house the people that we employ, otherwise they will go elsewhere. So this is sort of a conversation that we will have. We're going to be collecting question cards. And the staff will be available to collect cards from the audience, and we will go through our presentations. We have some set questions that I'm going to ask the panelists, and then we will try to answer as many of those cards as we can during this period. And afterwards, I'm sure you'll have additional questions. The city staff will be available to answer those questions further. Before we start, I just really want to thank the panelists, who are all volunteers who came here on their own time to participate in this panel, because they all believe in the need to create more housing, more affordable housing. So I'd like you all to give them a round of applause at this point. Okay. At this point, I am going to signal for the intro video. The staff really came across this video to talk about the need for affordable housing, and it's a pretty compelling video. So we're gonna show it at this point. So.
Man, this sure reminds me of home. I didn't have to worry about a thing. Nothing. My parents did everything for me. God, I've come a long way.
My first memories of home is Sundays after church. And I'd come right when we come in the door. My mom had already cooked the night before, and she had Sunday dinner warming up, and we were like, oh, this is just magical, absolutely magical. Just the smell of the whole kitchen and all my family there.
In my childhood, at 12, I met a girl. Her name is Rose, and we dated for 5 years, and on May 5th, 1970, we were married, and she's the girl of my dreams, and if I had to do it over again, I'd do it the same way. I wouldn't change a thing.
I was an only child, and I didn't have brothers or sisters. I had to work to help my mom. It was just the two of us that were in the house, because I come from a divorced couple.
When I was growing up in Modesto, when I was a child, I had a wonderful place to live, beautiful home. Both parents worked, wonderful Christmases, great brothers and sisters. The neighbors would look at us and say, hey, tell your mom and dad I said hi. And I go, okay. And he would walk down the street and people would say, those are the Joyner kids.
I mean, I had reached my the American dream that what I was always taught to want. Picket fence, 2-car garage, 2 dogs, 2 cats, a parakeet named Pete. So everything else was the bliss. The waking up to somebody that I really loved, feeling that warmth, just feeling her hair against my face. Just those things were what made it so wonderful. And it didn't seem like I could ask for anything more, and I thought that it would never end.
The future didn't bother me. I was pretty capable, and I had a husband who was beginning his practice, and we were surviving, and we were just too busy with all those children and all those basketball games and everything. I would have always thought I could handle everything, and I kept on thinking that till I was 90.
It was summer of my 14th birthday, and I was waiting to start high school, and my dad started sneaking in my bedroom at night. And from that point, it was no longer a home. It was not a safe dwelling.
Yeah, I raised the children. He worked, but he became an alcoholic, and then that destroyed the marriage. So then I took off by myself with the kids, me and my sons.
At around the age, I think around 23, 24, my sister and I started working for, we started stripping. We were strippers.
When I quit working at 90 a couple of years ago, I thought my Social Security, I just assumed it would cover everything. But then my market price housing was, they raised my rent in 1 month, they were raising it $500. Well, that puts a knock in your Social Security income and everything else, so.
About 13 years ago, she went for a physical and found out that she had cervical cancer. And a fairly decent world crumbled on me. I could have maintained it, but I just didn't know how in the beginning until it was too late.
Well, sometimes I can buy what I want, or I have to ask my sons for them to help me. That's what I don't have enough money to buy what I want, or sometimes even what I need, because I'm a low-income person, so.
No, never. Never in my wildest dreams coming out of the military would I ever think I was homeless. Never in a million years. I worked jobs. I worked a lot of jobs. And we were living in an apartment at the time, and with the money dwindling, I couldn't afford to pay the rent. We wound up being evicted and wound up in a car for 6 months, homeless. But I took my kids and I put them in friends' houses to make sure they would not have to inhere the difficulties we're going through. There was a point in time we were thinking about killing ourselves because it was that bad.
After all the things that I did, and all the drugs and all the running and all the partying, I found myself in jail. Woke up and I was in jail. I didn't want to make that my home.
We went looking for places to live, and we were told by a friend to go to the housing department. We went to Julian Street down in downtown San Jose, and that's where we filed for the Section 8.
When she passed and I let things go off the deep end, I realized that I needed help. And if it weren't for HUD-VASH, and this is accurate, this is the thing that one of the things I'm most grateful about, I would probably be living in my car or stuck in a homeless shelter.
If I didn't learn about affordable housing, I have a hard time finding an answer. What do? You try to find a little camp someplace, I suppose, or a bedroll, and you sit down in a doorway. I really don't know what I would have done.
Home is not only physical, it can be emotional, and it's internal and external. And Housing Authority has become part of my home, just like the dwelling space that I have and my 6 beautiful daughters and my husband. Home is something sacred. It's a place where you can heal. It's a place where you're allowed to grow and change. And I finally have a home, and that feels good.
Affordable housing is important because it gives you a lot of security, happiness, and it helps a lot with the health of the person. It does help.
I'm actually want to say how much I've gotten out of life today, how far I've come, and I'm ready to do more. You know, one thing I really want to do, and I'm going to tell myself that I will do, is that one of these days I'm going to give back my housing voucher to somebody who really, really will be glad to have it and honor and cherish it like I do to own my own home. And I'm working for that now, and I'm going to do it.
Oh, it makes all the difference in the world. You don't worry all the time. You know, what you do, you have a home. And someone has said it's dependable and you're going to continue to have it. It's the best feeling in the world. We need affordable housing. How can we exist otherwise? I mean, how can you exist when you're homeless? That's your question, right? How can you exist?
So let me introduce this wonderful panel. They're all going to do their own self-introductions, but wanted to give you a sense of who we have up here and where they're from. To my immediate left is Matt Regan. He's the Senior Vice President of Government Relations for the Bay Area Council. And he'll tell you a little bit more about the Bay Area Council and its role in advocating for more housing. And to his left is Deana Ellis, who is the Vice President for Land Resources for Carlisle Homes.
Cressley Homes.
Cressley Homes, close. Need stronger reading glasses. Corporation and a market rate developer. And to her left is Julie Quinn, and she is the Director of Resource Development for the Housing Trust of Silicon Valley, a nonprofit lender and intermediary. And to her left is Matt Franklin, who is the president of Mid-Penn Housing Corporation, a nationally recognized nonprofit affordable housing developer based in Foster City, right? Okay, so Matt, would you like to do your introduction and,
Sure.
and presentation?
Let me get up to the podium here. Hopefully this technology works. There we go, so F5. Look at that, an old guy got it to work. First of all, I'm Matt Regan. I'm here from the Bay Area Council. If you don't know our organization, we are a policy and advocacy group representing about 300 of the largest employers here in the 9-county San Francisco Bay Area. A few companies not too far from where we're sitting right here tonight are members, and I personally manage the housing portfolio, and I work on most of my day working on addressing the housing challenges that our members face in trying to attract and retain talent in this most competitive of housing markets in the world. I want to thank, to begin with, the City of Cupertino for hosting this event. You've probably all heard the analogy that when you want to describe something as being really difficult, it's like building a plane as you fly it. Well, when you're trying to redesign cities and adaptively reuse cities, it's like retrofitting an old plane as you're flying it and it's full of passengers. And half the passengers like the old plane and they don't want it retrofitted even though it's got metal fatigue and it's running out of gas. The other half are banging on the pilot's door saying you're going to crash, and we're trying to make it all work. So what generally happens in that scenario, which is how other cities tend to do planning, crazy things happen, and the people with the loudest bullhorns and who make the most noise at the Planning Commission generally get their way. And that is no way to design cities and no way to plan for the future. So congratulations and plaudits to the City of Cupertino for doing it this way, for having a collaborative educational process that it's not combative, it's not set up to be adversarial like the traditional planning and approval process is. This is the way to go, and I hope other cities emulate what you're doing here in Cupertino. So I'll start with my slideshow, and this is sort of to give you an idea of our perspective on the housing crisis. You're probably going, where's he going with this? There's new phraseology in the political lexicon, fake news and false facts. The photograph on the left of the slide here apparently has more people on it than the photograph on the right. That's what we call an alternative fact. Another alternative fact that you hear quite often in the Bay Area is that we're in a building boom. We're building way too much. We're building more than ever before. There's housing going up everywhere, and it's too much. Well, that's another alternative fact. This is a slide from Housing and Community Development. It's the state department that manages housing. And you can see the cycles of the housing boom and bust cycles. It's a cyclical business going back to 1955. And you can see the recent housing boom that we're in. It doesn't even reach the bottom of the troughs of the last cycle. The previous cycles, rather. We're at recessionary levels of housing production in the middle of a supposed housing boom. HCD estimates and policy analysts estimate that we need as a state to be building about 180,000 units a year in order to just meet natural population growth, our kids. For the last 10 years, we've been permitting 80,000. We've been digging a hole of 100,000 units a year for a decade or more. And that's the basic cause of our housing crisis. It's basic supply and demand. Now, that's compounded by the fact, particularly here in the Bay Area, that we've been fortunate enough to have the most successful economy on planet Earth. Cupertino is the envy of every other city on planet Earth, believe it or not. Even though you're having problems created by success, trust me, they're better than problems created by failure. If you don't believe me, go to Detroit. Go to Gary, Indiana. Go to Buffalo, New York. See what their problems look like and get back to me. But that's not to downplay the problems. They are problems nonetheless, and they need to be addressed and they need to be solved. But if you look at, this is a slide from MTC. We've been creating in the last decade about 8 jobs here in the Bay Area for every housing unit we permit. A good mix is about 1.5 housing units for every job, 1 unit for every 1.5 jobs created. So we're really out of whack, and it's getting worse. And if you look at the core inner part of the Bay Area, which Cupertino is a part of, it's about a 15-to-1 ratio. So when you have completely out of whack ratios like that, you get displacement, you get rising prices, you get stories like you just saw in the previous video. So it's a production problem at its core. How are we doing compared to other major metro areas that have similar economies to us? This is a slide that compares Seattle to San Francisco. Now, Seattle's about 25% smaller than San Francisco, but as you can see from the slide, they're permitting far more units of housing than San Francisco. And not only do they permit more, their application permitting and process to get a project from submitting plans to cutting ribbons is about half the time. They do it much quicker and at much less cost. So other major metros are responding to this same crisis in a very different way. California is expensive. If you go back to 1940, we were just slightly above the national average in terms of housing costs. Sometime around the mid 1980s, we just really started accelerating to the point where today the average home price in California is about 2.5 times the national average. Here's Cupertino, number 3 in the world, or in the country rather. Number 3 most expensive rental market in the United States of America. And as you can see from this slide, the Bay Area is very well represented in that regard. Again, and it's a product of a very healthy economy and a very constricted supply of new housing. Now, policy nerds like myself like to talk about the 3 E's: the environment, the economy, and equity. I won't address the equity piece too much. The video did a great job of that, but I'll start with the environment, and I've tried to make an argument for housing and sort of address it from these 3 angles, because I think everybody cares about, if not one, all 3. So if you look at environmental consequences of not building housing. So 170,000 people a day drive to their jobs in the Bay Area, job centers like Cupertino, from homes in the Central Valley, where we are building our affordable housing. You may have read the New York Times story earlier this week of the poor woman who works in San Francisco, makes $80,000 a year, gets out of her bed at 2 a.m. in Stockton before getting on her 3 or 4 buses and a couple of trains to get to her job every day. It's a drive till you qualify world, and we're pushing our middle class and affordable housing way out into the Central Valley and forcing people into very long and polluting commutes. Now they're the lucky ones. 70,000 people leave California every year to one state. And of the 70,000 people who leave, the vast majority of them are families who make less than $50,000 a year. That one state is the state of Texas. Now this slide's a little difficult to see, but these are greenhouse gas per capita production numbers for all 50 states. California is one of the little low bars. We're at about 3 tons per capita per year. That's each of you. Generates 3 tons of carbon a year. When we send that family to Texas and they buy their brand new 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home in suburban Houston, and the U-Haul pulls into the driveway, their GHG production immediately jumps from 3 tons per head to 17 tons per head. So if you care about the environment and you think global warming's real and you want to do something about it, support housing in California in your communities. Because there are dire environmental consequences to not building housing next to jobs, and particularly in California, where we have the highest renewable portfolio standards, cleanest energy, cleanest gas. It should be our job to allow this state to accommodate more and more people if you care about climate change. If you don't care about climate change, there's economic consequences. Our members are the largest employers in the Bay Area, and they are starting to tell us that the cost of doing business here in the Bay Area is getting prohibitive. One of our senior executives from a company not too far away from here said at a meeting recently, Silicon Valley will always exist. It just doesn't have to always exist here. That's an alarm bell. That should be worrying to everyone. We are lucky in this part of the world. We are the envy of the civilized world for the economy that we've created, all of us together. If we let that slip away because we refuse to accommodate those companies and the great work that they do, shame on us. I think history will condemn us for not doing that. And then the equity piece. It's well documented that it's the folks in the middle income and the lower income brackets who are suffering the most, and you saw some of them in the video. We are also home to, these are the unemployment black spots in the United States per metropolitan statistical area. And if you look at the bottom 20, I think 13 of them are in California. So when Donald Trump talks about forgotten America, it's not Ohio. It's parts of the Central Valley. We've got the highest unemployment black spots in these regions. And so it's up to us again, and again, a lot of these are communities that are struggling with housing affordability. Companies won't locate there. Even in the Central Valley, where housing is much cheaper than here, it's still by orders of magnitude more expensive than places like Texas and Florida, where it's much more easy for companies to locate blue-collar jobs. This is a quote from Jason Furman, who was President Obama's chief economic advisor. And I'm not going to read it. I'll just leave it there so you can read it. But it's an important, a very, very important sentiment. Over-regulation of land has led to a stratification of our society in a way that it's never been stratified before. The wealth gap, the societal gaps, the racial gaps that used to be not too wide in this country have widened by orders of magnitude in the last generation. And it's by and large a result of the lack of affordable housing. We've cut off communities of color and lower income communities from neighborhoods and cities of opportunity. This is a city of opportunity, and it should be, certainly from an equity standpoint, in all of our interests to allow everybody to share in the success that's been created here. And I will add one final comment. Cupertino is not alone in folks thinking that new development threatens my property value and threatens my quality of life. It's a sentiment that's shared and a worry that's shared in communities across the Bay Area, across California for that matter. But I would give you one cautionary tale. We're seeing in Oakland's Children's Hospital, for example, the preeminent children's hospital in the United States of America. The same for David and Lucille Packard Hospital, Children's Hospital. They can't hire nurses. They are not able to get nurses to work in those hospitals. So if you have a sick child and you rush them to that hospital, and there's no nurse to take care of them, and your child dies because there wasn't an affordable unit in the community nearby for that nurse to avail of. That's an affordable housing problem. Teachers, as you saw from the mayor's presentation, I looked on Redfin last night. There's 35 homes for sale in Cupertino, two below $1 million. The average is about $2.5 million. There isn't a single teacher in your school district who can afford to live in your city. Those teachers are leaving. So that's going to impact the quality of your schools. And if you don't think that the quality of your schools has an impact on the price of your homes, then that's a universe that's not based on reality. So you need a good mix of housing at all levels of affordability in order to have a sustainable housing market where you get healthy price appreciation. It's not sustainable to get 10% price appreciation in your home value because you're going off a cliff when there's no teachers and no nurses and no service sector workers and nobody to work in City Hall, because they're driving from Manteca. That's just not a sustainable situation. So it's in all of your interests, appealing to the basist at the end, your property values, but it is in your interest if that's what's motivating and that's why you're here, to have a sustainable mix of all levels of housing affordability. Thank you so much.
Just F5. Good evening. Am I here? First thing, Deana Ellis with Cressley Homes. Oh, sorry about that. With Cressley Homes. I'm so pleased to be here. I think this is such a important topic. It's meaningful that you're all taking your evening to be able to be here. I'm with Cressley Homes. We are primarily a single family and apartment developer based both in the Sacramento area, the Bay Area, working on a number of projects in the Campbell area, Napa, and others. At this point, I would actually say we are, Sacramento is starting to kind of build some of the Bay Area's affordable housing. We're here because obviously this is the epicenter of the world. My team is responsible for all land purchases, all entitlements, and all civil improvements for projects. I put on here, I don't know if you can see it, on F5, is it on here? Not quite sure how it works here. Technical difficulties. To go to the next slide presentation. F5. I'm pleased to know it's not operator error. Do I need to thumb through them? Perfect. Thank you so much. I think this is a very important slide for each community, whether it's Sacramento or it's Los Angeles or it's Cupertino, to kind of have an internal discussion about. I personally happen to believe that a significant portion of solving affordable housing in the state of California, both on a regional and a local basis, is density. And that density is decided by each community, whether that's single family homes and moving to townhouses and then moving to apartments and obviously ultimately high rises. I wish this was mine. I've stole this and plagiarized it from someone. I think it's really effective to talk about kind of the spectrum of housing, what that housing types, what they look like, because oftentimes you can't see them side by side. I wanted to provide this particular project. This is a lower density project that we actually rehabbed in Napa. This is a detached single-family, kind of a smaller townhouse project. It's probably 9 to 10 units to the acre across that missing middle spectrum that you saw. So a lower density project. This is a rental apartments. This project is in Sacramento. Again, to just give you some visual reference, this project is an apartment project. It's mixed income, 10% affordable, 90% market rate. The AMI, I believe, is 80%. And it is approximately 21 units to the acre, saltwater pool, full granite, just beautiful, connected to walkways and to schools and to proximity to housing and to other housing in the community, and commercial, residential, commercial that you can actually walk to from your neighborhood. This is a project we also, and the reason I should emphasize, I'm emphasizing these Sacramento projects is they're a little bit lower density and they're projects that have actually physically been constructed. So I don't have projects that have not yet been constructed to share. This particular project, I apologize, is on the previous slide, is about 23 units to the acre. It's also a market rate, 100% market rate project, but adjacent to this, this is about 22 to 23, maybe 24 units to the acre. But directly adjacent to this with a shared access road, we also have single family homes that are on the next slide. This particular project shares an interface with that previous slide. And this is about 8 to 9 units to the acre on a net basis. But gives you an idea of the increasing density that we've been working through. This project we're actually working in the city of Folsom, directly across the street from Intel's campus in Folsom, where that live, work, play environment will really thrive. You'll have the ability to literally walk from an intersection to be able to walk to work. This is, to me, really the dream. I think Matt was talking about that a little bit. Live-work balance, 18-hour cities and 20-hour cities. This is another project that also has shared single-family homes directly adjacent to that previous slide. So we have an ownership component and we have a residential market rate component where that renters and owners can live together really seamlessly and live really well. And we have found that to be very accretive to property values. I'll discuss this kind of during our roundtable discussion. These are some of the issues that I really think are affecting the state of California and regionally, obviously, for the Bay Area and for San Francisco. And the part of the reason, as Matt also discussed, I could actually sit down now because I agree with about 90% of what Matt said, is that we really are in such a supply glut almost for 10 years. We're just very little homes were built on a state basis and jobs replaced that and just came back on such a thriving basis post-recession. We're in a very, very deep hole to dig our way out of. Production is just not there. We're not even near, both on the market rate or the affordable basis, anywhere near, in my opinion, where we should be. So happy and looking forward to your discussion tonight. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Julie with the Housing Trust Silicon Valley, and before I launch into all of this, thank you for having me here tonight and for letting the Housing Trust be part of the conversation. Cupertino is sort of a special place for me because I'm one of those people. My husband got right out of school, took a job at Apple, and we moved from North Carolina to California in 2008, as a lot of people were moving here. So we're those transplants, and we've settled here and have started a family and are facing all of these challenges that we're going to talk about. Luckily, not all of the challenges. Some of the challenges. So I work for Housing Trust Silicon Valley. We are a nonprofit community loan fund, and what that means is that we're helping fill pieces that the market financing doesn't address. So we work across the entire spectrum of housing needs. We provide financing for affordable housing rental developments, We work with first-time homebuyers and have down payment assistance programs and do some below market rate administration, not for the city of Cupertino, but for the city of Campbell. No, sorry, for the city of Santa Clara. And we also work with people who are experiencing homelessness and providing deposit assistance programs, and also on the multifamily side helping to finance building or building a rehab of units for those people to move into. Can you tell that I'm nervous? Am I talking really, really fast? So anyway, as a community loan fund, what the Housing Trust does is we take money from a lot of different sources. We have, historically we've had public sources and we've had private sources. And we were very proud of the fact that we've been able to bring those two together. And by private sources, I mean corporations and foundations and banks and individuals. And so what we've been able to do over the last 17 years is to invest $145 million into the communities where we work, which has allowed the people who borrow money from us to leverage $2.6 billion to create over 15,000 affordable housing opportunities and help over 27,000 people. So where does the Housing Trust work? That's a question that we're struggling with all the time. But basically, we're based in Silicon Valley and we work regionally. You can see that there's a big cluster in Santa Clara County. So this is really our home, and this is where we do a lot of our work, and we're very proud of that. But there's also a need for the type of work that we do outside of Santa Clara County, so we don't limit ourselves. So why do we do what we do? You've seen a lot of numbers so far, which is all to prove the point. This is a little more local. These are San Jose, but you can just sort of shift the bars a little bit, and you can see how expensive it is to live here for a lot of different people. So even tech employees who we think earn all this money and are driving everybody out, they are also facing challenges just affording market rate units. And that effect spills over into the community. So we have mega commutes, tons of traffic, congestion, and then these jobs, housing numbers again. But I think the interesting thing is the deficit in Santa Clara County alone for affordable units. And when I say affordable rental homes, I'm talking about an apartment that somebody who's earning 80% of the area median income, or AMI, can afford, and that's about $80,000 for a family of four. So we need 70,000 units for people earning as much as $80,000 and below in Santa Clara County to solve for the affordable housing problem. So then I wanted to just share a little bit of the work that the Housing Trust has done in Cupertino. We've been very fortunate to be involved in some great projects in the city. I was going through numbers today, and I was thinking, how many homebuyer loans have we been able to make in the city of Cupertino? And I was shocked to find that it was one. And we just happened to have his story and his pictures. That worked out well, but I was very surprised to see that it was only one homeowner that we had been able to help with our down payment assistance in the city of Cupertino. And I'm really hoping that there are some ways in the near future that we're able to help many more people. And then the other two examples are rental projects. The one is the West Valley Community Services. We were able to provide some assistance for them 10 plus years ago, and then a new project that people are probably familiar with. It's going to be going up on Stevens Creek. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll let you tee that up too. I know my old self well enough to accept the help. All right, and I'm advancing with that. Yes. All right, evening, folks. I'm Matt Franklin. I'm the president of Mid-Penn Housing. I too would like to thank the city for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to be brief. I want to get to the discussion and also to your questions. Let me just tell you a little bit about Mid-Penn. We're a nonprofit affordable housing developer. So we really have kind of three companies in one. We have a development arm, and we've developed, since our founding in 1970, about 8,000 homes in 10 counties in Northern California. We're based in San Mateo County. We have quite a bit of activity right now, about 2,400 more homes in the pipeline. We manage everything that we own through our own property management company, including about 3,700 units here in Santa Clara County. And then we also have a resident services corporation where we invest over $7.5 million a year in programs for the kids and the heads of households and the seniors. So I want to take a step back. This is something I do briefly when I'm talking to audience who may be mixed and a little new to the whole idea of affordable housing. What are we talking about? So bear with me. It used to be in this country in the 40s, 50s, and 60s that the way that the government tried to do something to help people with housing was through what was called public housing. So this was government run, government owned, government managed, federal government. So the money literally coming through Congress, the rules coming through Congress. It's what today is called your housing authority. There's a county housing authority, which was the sponsor of the video here. It created a lot, I think, legitimately, of perceptions around affordable housing that are really powerful and hard to shake, even for a lot of folks as time goes on. And I would be one, as somebody who's worked in this field for 25 years and has a passion for affordable housing, would be open and honest about some of those mistakes. So I think some of the big categories were, these were poorly cited. Does anybody know these developments that I've pictured here? They're little extreme examples, but it's Cabrini Green and Robert Taylor Homes in Chicago. Legendary developments. Ones that in many cases suffered from discriminatory zoning for a lot of complicated reasons. My family lives in southern Marin, and I drive a long way to work. But there's an area up there called Marin City that's right after you go over the Golden Gate Bridge. And it has some old public housing in there that has the good fortune of having a mountain behind it and a highway in front of it, and being perfectly penned off from any jobs or retail or parks or any of the other beautiful amenities in Marin County. It's not a coincidence of how decisions were made back in those days. Often poor design, underinvestment in the quality of the housing and the quality of the construction. I would argue an over-concentration of the non-working poor in the communities. I'll talk more about that. I worked at HUD in a prior life in the Clinton administration, so I can freely say poorly managed. The government is not a good landlord. And all the investment was in the buildings and not the people. And it was a big mistake. So I immodestly call this the Mid-Penn model, but it's really what the whole new generation of public investment, and there's a lot of other good groups, and really, as Olson said, a whole ecosystem that the Bay Area is fortunate to have one of the strongest in the country that has tried to take the lessons of those failures and apply them to how we do our work now. So now the new public investment in affordable housing tends to be to private organizations, like mine, Mid-Penn Housing. I see Kathy Robertson from Charities Housing, another really great local group. There's dozens of them in the Bay Area, mostly nonprofit, some for-profit, who've really tried to digest these lessons. So we work really, really hard to site our developments near important neighborhood amenities, transportation, jobs, commercial serving retail, schools, parks, all the same places where you would want your housing to be. We believe strongly that great design matters, that if it's a necessary but not sufficient condition to creating a healthy community is to have a really healthy building and one that is designed well. Believe strongly that mixed income communities function better than an over-concentration of the non-working poor. I think there are folks who are in circumstance where they're in and out of the workforce, and I believe strongly that they are deserving of public assistance. And I know that communities function better when there are working folks in the community as well. Believe strongly in the quality of quality property and asset management. So, we have over 250 employees in our property management. We manage everything we own. It's not a business line for us. It's an expression of mission. If you want to have a great community, I believe we need to employ and control all the way down to the maintenance people. And we invest heavily in the people. the housing becomes a platform for life change and life advancement. It's not enough to just invest in the housing. So I just want to set that context a little bit. This is going to be, we all have a little different numbers. I knew Matt would have the best and the biggest. But it's fundamentally the same point. So there's a lot of different arguments for affordable housing. There's a lot of different ways you can come at this. I'm someone who believes there's a moral argument for affordable housing, that housing is a fundamental right. And I believe strongly that there's an economic argument for why affordable housing is really important. And you've heard Matt articulate it. These numbers attempt to articulate the same thing. Fundamentally, we have an imbalance between where the jobs are being created and where the housing's being created. And so you've heard about the environmental impacts that are real, but at the end of the day, we just will not have a sustainable economy if we don't accommodate the workforce. So the striking thing here to me is, we all are showing a little different numbers. We're just not producing enough housing, not nearly enough affordable housing. But the number that always jumps out at me is that 2/3 of the jobs that are created in Silicon Valley, defined as San Mateo and Santa Clara County, pay $50,000 a year or less. And these are jobs that are critical to our economy, right? So it really gets to the point of whether our economy is going to be sustainable. So I just will go through these pretty quickly. This is just to show you a little bit of some of our developments here in the county. I won't spend a lot of time on them. This is a senior development in Milpitas, right on Main Street. It's directly adjacent to a new health clinic and across from a new library, so a really wonderful location on Main Street. This is another senior development on Fair Oaks in Sunnyvale, also right next to a brand new county health clinic, right on Fair Oaks Boulevard. Anazuka Crossing is a family development, so 2/3 of the 8,000 homes that we own and manage are family developments. Over 80% of the heads of households in those, on average, are in the active workforce. So there are folks, the gentleman who you heard about whose wife had cancer in the video, who fell on hard times and mentioned what he called a VASH voucher, which is a veteran assistance. He's a veteran. He lives at Anazuka, so we have a set aside of about 10 units here for the formerly homeless. And the vast majority are working families. They're exactly in that little north or south of $50,000 a year working folks who are having trouble staying in the valley. This is Edwina Benner Plaza. Anyone know who Edwina Benner was? She was the first female mayor of Sunnyvale. It's on 237, just off 237, a really wonderful location. It's on the boards, if you will. We're about to start construction on that, right next to the VTA light rail, also a senior development. And then, also a family development. And then a senior development in Mountain View called Paulson Park. So thank you for that opportunity.
So you get a sense from the panelists' presentations of the quality of the work that they all have done in the area of housing policy and affordable housing. And I think that they all bring a passion to the work that they do, because this can be very, very tough work in trying to create and support the policies or actually do the development of affordable housing. It doesn't happen overnight, and it takes a lot of work and a lot of staff and a lot of perseverance and a lot of and in the field of affordable housing, it takes multiple sources of financing that we have to put together to make those things work. And in the market rate sector, it's the perseverance of entitlements and going through a very long and involved process before we can create the affordable housing. So one of the things that happened in San Francisco is we had this wonderful boom in terms of employment, but it takes us so long to respond to those jobs to create the market rate and the affordable housing. There's always a lag between where the economy goes and the real estate market, because it takes 4 to 5 years if we're lucky, sometimes longer than that, to create affordable housing. So there's always been a mismatch between the the housing stock and the job supply. And so the other day we were looking at stats in my office when I had an office, and there was, for the past 5 or 6 years, we were averaging, 10,000 new residents per year, and probably 20,000 new jobs per year, but we were only building 5,000 units. And this goes back to what Matt said about the deficit in terms of not having enough supply to address the demand. I think the scary part of that stat was that though we were getting new residents, 10,000 new residents, what we didn't see was the churn. We were actually not getting 10,000 new residents. We were actually getting 30,000 new residents, and we were losing 20,000 new residents who were priced out of the market and moved to somewhere else in the Bay Area. So we were thinking that it was just a net 10, but it was really a much greater dislocation because of the job markets overall. So the first question to the panelists is, what is causing the housing crisis specifically here in Silicon Valley? So Matt, would you start that?
Sure. I think we've covered pretty well the housing jobs mismatch and imbalance. I think the numbers are compelling. I just saw a report today on my way here that this is more data. In the last 5 years, Santa Clara County has created 171,000 jobs and issued 28,000 housing permits. So it's obviously a mismatch. It's a basic supply and demand problem. But I'll address it. What are the causes of that mismatch? Why are we not able to build or permit or allow enough housing to meet that demand? What has happened since the 70s and the 60s and the 50s when we were permitting as a state 200,000 units a year? Fast forward to today when we can barely make 80. Again, in an era of incredibly cheap capital and a huge demand and rising wages and an incredibly healthy economy, all the conditions are perfect for housing production, but we're just not doing it. And it's at its core, it's a political problem. And you have all sorts of entrenched power structures, particularly in Sacramento, who have, for better or worse, created an environment where it's difficult to create the legal framework to make housing easier and less expensive to permit. And you have, at the local level, you have a lot of opposition, a lot of fear. There's a lot of misinformation that's peddled at city halls across the region. I spend way too many Tuesday nights in front of planning commissions and city councils till 10:30, 11:30. San Jose is the best. They usually finish at 1 a.m. And you hear the same irrational arguments, and it's, I support affordable housing, I support housing, but ... insert excuse here. And usually it circulates around traffic, people concerned about traffic impacts, and those are genuine concerns because there's a natural assumption that new development creates traffic, and that's going to impact my quality of life, therefore I need to oppose that construction. That's not actually the case. Having homes and jobs adjacent to each other actually reduces traffic, even new homes adjacent to jobs. As I mentioned earlier, 170,000 people a day drive into the Bay Area from their homes in the Central Valley. And when they get onto our freeways, and now they all have these apps called Waze. So not only are they on the freeways that are backed up, they're going onto surface streets and shortcutting through neighborhoods because it's more efficient that way. So these are people, if they were living closer to their jobs, wouldn't be driving around neighborhoods trying to get to their jobs. They would be walking, they would be biking, they would be taking transit. So in the world that we currently live in, actually homes next to jobs reduces traffic. It might be counterintuitive, but it's true. All the top traffic, and I believe the next forum you're going to have is on traffic, and you will get much smarter people than me hopefully convince you of that. But it is true. So if we can get past some of the local myths about housing, Matt very well explained the myth that having affordable housing is it's going to impact the price of your home or the quality of your neighborhood. That's a huge myth. The data is very strong on mixed income communities having healthy societal socioeconomic mixes create much healthier economies and much better home values. So there are a lot of myths, and we need to dispel those myths, particularly at the local government level where the decisions are being made, which again, going back to my first point, which is why we need to commend and congratulate the City of Cupertino for doing it this way, having a series of forums where you will learn about the economics of housing and land use, not sort of help perpetuate the myths. So I think this is a step in the right direction, and I think if other cities can emulate what we're doing here, what Cupertino is doing, I think it'll bode well for the rest of the region.
Deana, you're a developer.
It's like an echo chamber of everything that Matt just said. I mean, I'm in such concurrence with your thoughts. I would say an acceleration of critical housing really has occurred during that 10-year gap from the not just a recession in California for housing. Oftentimes in housing we say it was a depression. It was just so draconian, the number of units that were taken offline either through lack of finance, lack of ability, lack of desire. You just couldn't move forward during that 10-year period. And we began that process really in such a negative position. We are so far behind the curve on a state, a regional, and a local agency basis in housing, both for sale and for market rate and for affordable. That I'm really concerned. Another big component that I think that accelerates the crisis is, which has really been a sleeping giant, is the jobs. I feel incredibly passionate about the housing jobs creation link. And thus far, I think Olson or Matt, somebody might have raised this previously, the number of trips that are going outbound out of California each year. And so for all of us, whatever communities we live in may not resonate for us until our local jobs really start to move away, whether it's the nurses or ultimately it's your software engineers. Just on a personal basis, I have many friends that have worked in the Bay Area are now living in Texas. Do they love the schools? They do not. I have many friends that are now strategically choosing to live in Utah. Strategically choosing to live in Utah and to come back. No.
You sound shocked.
Well, I think
people actually do that.
People actually. But I'm just saying is that they're taking Southwest back and forth. It's cheaper for them to be able to live there, and they commute in, and they're using Airbnb 2 or 3 days a week to be able to live here, and they're exporting the income that they're generating in California, and they're living in Utah. And there could be an acceleration. I believe there could be an acceleration of that on a state and a regional, really primarily a regional basis. We are Rome. You are Rome.
Well, so Matt mentioned the traffic. I think there's a variety of impacts that folks worry about. So when you think about new development, I think the worry is, I think we tend to think of it in the abstract. So if we're going to build 200 new affordable units, that's going to be more families coming into the community. It's going to be more kids coming into the school district. These may be low resource. These are by definition low resource families. What's that impact going to be? The reality is that up and down Silicon Valley, in every community, including Cupertino, despite all the numbers, there's a lot of low-income folks who are figuring out how to live here today. They're just living in really unsustainable conditions, right? So they're doubled or tripled up. They may even be living in a garage somewhere. They're living in overcrowded, unsafe, unsanitary conditions. They're paying 60, 70, 80% of their household income towards housing at the expense of health and their kids' education, which is usually what they really want to focus on, or investing in their own career. And so, one of the things we do a lot is we create a local preference for the affordable housing. So if we came in with 200 units here, there could be a preference for folks who already live and work in Cupertino, right? And and they are here. And so now they would have a sustainable, healthy way to stay here and to keep their job, which is probably local, which is why they're here. Then it creates a platform for investment in those families and advancement. So, when we talk about our services program, it's after school programs for the kids that are academically based, that are linked up with the schools so that they can use that stability of housing to do better in school. It's health and wellness programs for the seniors so they can age in place, not move into publicly subsidized nursing homes and other things that cost us all a lot of money in public health costs. So I think we get caught up in this impact idea. And again, as Matt said, traffic's one example, but there's a variety of examples of how the impacts are actually lessened by doing the development, because the impacts are so negative, currently with the folks who are trying to make it here.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's causing the housing crisis in Silicon Valley. What everybody just said, I think I would add to that it's not enough to be not in my backyard, but to really go out and support projects that are being proposed in the community. If you feel like they're good projects, don't stay home because they're good projects. Go show up at the planning commission meeting, show up at the city council meetings, because I've sat through a few of those, and you get a lot fewer passionate people supporting a project, even though they're out there. They just, for some reason, there's a lot of things to do in your day, and you don't necessarily think you have time to show up. But it's really, I think, a powerful thing for a community to get behind a project. Don't just not oppose it, but support it.
Often the case, the commissioners will look at the room and sort of count heads and say, well, this room has, 2/3, of the folks, that are opposed it. Why outside of the room, as you said, there are so many people who are supportive of it, but haven't taken the time to actually express that to the commissioners or to the city council. That's a great point. Well, if more housing is needed, what are the barriers to the creation of housing? I've heard some people are saying we don't want housing, we want commercial, and we just want the commercial. We don't want the housing, we don't need the housing, and that's what some communities are saying. What are the barriers to it, Deana, sorry.
Happens all the time. It'll continue to happen.
I know.
I actually had a slide up, and it's not up any longer, but I'm going to kind of reference it for the discussion. Obviously, lingering, whether you're a market rate developer or an affordable developer, land scarcity. We're competing for that same land the way that a commercial developer would be looking at that property and that revenue generation from retail that may come to a city. That can be a difficult offset for tax sharing and those type of things for a city. So certainly land scarcity. Fees. This is a particular emphasis for me, and I'm always interested. I can be a little wonkish on these type of things, but many time fees are generated on larger units. The background nexus fee studies are not triangulated for unit sizes, so all of the demand perhaps on sewer that are driving the sewer fees are predicated on a 1,500, maybe the 2,000 square foot home. Versus now, true home development could actually be much smaller. We all live better through technology. We can all live with less, generally open space concepts and doing those things. But as a developer, I'm not incentivized to build a smaller unit because the fees are such a load on the price of the home. I'd rather sell more home to be able to recognize my return, which helps to offset transportation costs and infrastructure and parks and school fees, and oftentimes participation in affordable housing, whether it's on-site or through fees, those type of things. But those very background nexus studies are oftentimes in an imbalance to what the market is telling us. Today, I mean, so much, even I think Julie was alluding to it, is affordability by design. There's many people, whether you're a first-time renter or buyer, that would much prefer to have a smaller unit, or you're an empty nester. I'm soon to be in 4 or 5 years. I can't wait to ditch the lawn and to do all of those kind of things. I'll gladly exchange my time for that and a much smaller but much more architectural type of unit. It's just that particular type and entry level is very difficult for a market rate developer to be able to build. A lot of that has to do with the fees and the nexus of the fees to the percentage of the home price. Another one that's not particularly sexy but important is aging infrastructure. If you think no one shows up at a planning commission, wait until you talk about CIP and capital infrastructure programs for a city, and sewer and water and drainage, if you really dug into that and knew, and I don't by chance for the city of Cupertino, but for most cities, really truly how aging the pipe systems are, and that they do not have enough capital infrastructure to be able to go back and to replace that. It's daunting. So developer, I'm asked to come in and to build my requirement for my portion and my impact on a development. Well, when I open up an old street, the pipes are busted, they're broken. I end up having to oversize, replace. The burden that we thought we would be placing on those homes is much different than what we ultimately get when we actually crack open old streets. Construction costs are rising, part of what's contributing to home prices and to rent prices, many tens of times over the rate of inflation. Overhead, labor, scarcity. Many times we can't find very talented craftsmen to be able to work in this area. Somewhat, what Matt, I think two Matts were indicating, can't get nurses in hospitals, and I can't get craftsmen to be able to build a beautiful staircase because they can't afford to live or to work or to drive here. Just the burden for their craftsmanship, it just isn't there. So they look for lower cost environments to be able to work. Perceived land value is a big one. A landowner and what they think it's actually worth versus backing in all of those barriers to entry are oftentimes like this. And so I think that those are particular barriers to entry that start to snowball into the effect that has led to a crisis.
Matt, you're an affordable developer. Aren't you welcomed with open arms in communities?
Well, there's again, it goes to the wisdom of this forum. There's always a really important education process, partly because of, germane to my initial presentation, there's a lot of negative perception around affordable housing, and I would argue for good reason. There was, and I think that's sort of true of a lot of development. So, we talk about density. Earlier, there's an emphasis on density. I think one of the things that all of the 14 cities in Santa Clara County and the 21 cities in San Mateo County need to do and are doing is trying to embrace density and try to understand how to do it. But if you're going to do it, you have to do it well, and you have to do it thoughtfully. And so, some of those family developments I showed you were about 60 units to the acre. We spend a lot of time thinking about, and those are 1 and 2 and 3 bedroom units. We intentionally build some large units for large families because that's a need that the market doesn't meet. You have to be really thoughtful about how to do that density in a really thoughtful way so that it works for 60 or 70 families. So you've got the right open space, you're making every inch of that 800 or 900 square foot 2 bedroom or 1,000 or 1,100 square foot 3 bedroom or 1,200 square foot 3 bedroom, work maximally efficiently for that family and that the community functions well. But I think so I think there's always an education process. And I think, in the communities I work in, people talk all the time about NIMBYism and isn't it horrible? It's actually some of the most fulfilling work that we do, because if folks will engage in the process, then I think and bring their ideas to it. There's a way to do this really well. There's a way to build more dense buildings in the right location, not every part of your community, but to do it very thoughtfully and to do it well, and to have it be some of the best housing on the block and not the worst. If you just say density in and of itself, I think it's an intimidating word. It doesn't sound good to really anybody. So you have to engage together, and you have to spend time together sharing ideas and going and looking at examples and saying what works and what doesn't work. And so I've found where there are communities that are willing to engage, even if they are anti-growth or have concerns about affordable housing. We the vast majority of times can come to a development that they feel good about and that they feel they have an influence on and that is a positive in their community. But these are complicated issues. People care about traffic for a reason, right? Because traffic's really tough around here, and so you need to be thoughtful and careful about this. But one of the keys, I think, is land use in planning for density. And if you can plan ahead, if you can have this discussion ahead of just the one development and try to plan for parts of your city where you will embrace density under certain conditions, certain design standards, certain thoughtfulness of open space, priorities around local residents or other mitigations to impact. It's when you can do that at a real neighborhood level or city level that you create the groundwork to have some production and to start to really, have an impact in terms of meeting the need and to do it in a way that is thoughtful. I mean, developers are really pretty amazing. If you tell them the rules of the game, they'll follow the rules of the game. So if you're thoughtful about setting up those rules, then I think they'll come and build, at the quality and at the type that you're comfortable with.
Julie, what's been your experience in trying to create affordable housing in the valley?
I work for a community lender, so I'll come at it from the financing standpoint. Money to build affordable housing. So land is really expensive, building is really expensive, and the state lost some really valuable resources to finance affordable housing in the last 8 years. Has it been?
Yeah, when redevelopment went away, and I lost my job.
Yeah.
One of your jobs.
One of my jobs was former director at a redevelopment agency.
Yeah, when redevelopment went away, it was something like $60 million throughout the Bay Area per year was lost for affordable housing. And that goes to subsidizing the difference between what it costs to build homes and what people can afford to pay who only earn $30,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year. So financing's definitely been a big barrier. There have been some big wins locally on that front. I mean, the county, Santa Clara County, passed Measure A in November, which was nearly $1 billion that's going into the system for affordable housing. A large chunk of that is going specifically to help extremely low-income people and those that are experiencing homelessness or at danger of homelessness. But there's a pretty good piece of it that's being set aside for the missing middle, which is about $100 million, and for home ownership. So I think there's some exciting things. And then local cities are doing things to boost their affordable housing coffers, and one of them is fees that developers may not be excited about, but it's a great way to have market rate development of all kinds, putting into the public benefit of housing that people couldn't otherwise afford.
Well, one of the things I used to say in my former job was the only thing affordable about my housing is what I charge for it. I have to pay market rate for land, I have to pay market rate for the architects, I have to pay market rate for construction, and everything else. And so, Matt, could you give us a little, affordable housing 101? What does it take to build affordable housing as a standalone project or as part of a market rate development?
Oh, that's a tough one. If you,
the other Matt.
Yeah. That's all right. Go ahead, Matt. Okay.
Work your way in here.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Do you want me to start? Okay, I'll give you a quick 2 minutes. Developers like Deana are often accused of being greedy, and it's greedy developers that are driving up costs. That's why nothing's affordable. There's a project that Olson's probably not going to like me mentioning. It's on South Van Ness in San Francisco. It's 100% affordable, 100% funded by the Mayor's Office of Housing. It's $890,000 a door. That's 100% affordable. It's built by the city of San Francisco. No profits involved. That's what it costs to buy the land and build the unit. So that's why, if you use that as an example, and by the way, that project doesn't have to pay any of the fees that Deana has to pay.
Yes.
So, and the fee stack on top of a market rate housing is generally $100,000 a door in some communities, higher in others. And then you have inclusionary ordinances, and I could go. I mean, my own personal thinking about fees, particularly affordable housing fees. I think we need to find a permanent, sustainable source of funding for affordable housing, because I think the policy of taxing housing to pay for housing is the stupidest economic policy you could ever come up with. We don't tax schools to pay for education, so why should we tax housing to pay for housing? I mean, it's crazy on its premise. And it goes back to the earlier comment I think Deana made that, it was the mayor, It's the last person in the door in any community because of, I'll touch the third rail here, Prop 13 and other ways that we pay for things in California. We heap the costs on the last person in the door. Deana has to fix the roads and has to fix the sewer and has to build the parks and pay for the fire. All of that is piled on for the privilege of being able to live in a community. The next person in has to pay $1 million a door. So that's why when developers...
So now we can debate this.
Yeah.
I would like to debate this with my well-named friend, Matt.
So when
So
developers are accused of being greedy, you actually have to look at the cost stack. And the profits are no different today than they were 20 years ago. Wall Street demands a certain return on its investment that hasn't changed an awful lot. The risk has changed, so they're probably asking for a little more return. But I think, and I hope Matt would agree before he starts debating with me, that there's a better solution than taxing housing to pay for housing. If we can find, as a society, as a state, a way to pay for housing that's not coming out of housing, which, there's an economic adage, the more you tax something, the less of it you get. So we're getting less housing because we tax it so much. So, I mean, that's my perspective. I think we need to find a better way to pay for affordable housing than the way we currently do it. And
before
I'll leave
you
it
two
at
go,
that.
I have a point of view on this, and I agree with that. I also do think we have, as housing developers, do have some responsibility. I can't carry all of the weight. Mm-hmm. Olson, you talked about the number of units that are entitled.
Yeah.
In the city of San Francisco versus the number of homes that and units that are actually produced.
Yeah.
It's that imbalance. There's reaching and there's overreaching to the point that projects are infeasible. And so I think that's a really important statement. The other thing is, I say it all the time, I get that all the time, that developers are greedy. Yes, we are motivated by profit. We are motivated by profit, as were every one of the home builders that built all of our homes. Because it's that profit motive, part of what that drives a very risk-based business. But the other thing is development, whether it's our company or another company, not so much a nonprofit, we're an interim bank. I mean, those costs have to be borne upon a new homeowner. Eventually there's an exchange rate. That new homeowner is going to take over that obligation. And at some point it's infeasible, I can't move forward, pricing gets more out of it becomes just this spiral that's just really, ultimately, I hope for our state, is not a death spiral. I feel quite passionate about the subject, that from a for-profit developer, there was a 10-year period where in development, I would say 80 to 90% of folks in development, even on the public side, were losing jobs. Nothing was developed. It is a very risk-based business. Mm-hmm. And so we are just interim banks. So now I'm going to let the two.
So I heard you say a yes and, right?
Yes and.
And that would be
small
my view.
And.
So just what we're debating here, just to clarify, is there many cities have housing impact fees. So they charge a fee to developers of market rate housing, or commercial impact fees, developers of commercial space. So my good friend Matt Reagan, who's a wonderful housing advocate, made the statement that it's the craziest thing he's ever seen. It's actually based in economic logic. The idea is that for every job you bring in to Cupertino, or for every luxury market rate housing unit, it creates the demand for more low-paying jobs, right? So they go to the dry cleaner. Their kids go to the school, they're teachers. They go to the restaurants. And there's economic data out there that shows, in the most extreme case for the high-wage tech workers, there's 5 low-paying jobs that are created for every one that moves into your community. And so if you believe that you have a responsibility to try to house those workers, your housing problem gets worse every time someone moves in. So there's an economic study that's done that tries to get that fee right. Mm-hmm. So that it's not an undue burden. Mm-hmm. So there's, in my view, a real logic to the impact fees, but it's been one of the very few tools that we have to try to finance housing. And the other statement that was made is that it shouldn't all be borne on the back of private developers, and I totally agree with that. I think there's a lot of other ways that we can generate public subsidy for affordable housing. At the end of the day, so the statement was made, but just to clarify, for our housing, the family housing that MidPenn's currently developing, Most of the biggest source we have is a federal source. It's called the low-income housing tax credit. It creates the income targeting. And so it caps out at about 60% of area median income as far as eligibility. So for a family of 4 in this county, that's about $60,000 a year. So that's way too low. It works in Des Moines, Iowa, right? Where market rate is, you maybe have to earn about 70 or 60 or 50,000 a year to buy the median home price. But here, as you all well know, probably have friends and families and neighbors who might be earning, 80, 90, 100, 120,000 a year and still having a really difficult time getting the housing they need. So that's this reference to the missing middle. One of the things we're all working on is how do we get more tools, financing tools, to try to meet, farther up the income spectrum, because that's the reality of Silicon Valley. That 60,000 a year and less is really important. It's a huge part of our economy. So not to say it's not important, but it's not enough for Silicon Valley. It's a federal program driving a lot of our production here that is a mismatch.
Julie, how can communities address that need for folks who don't qualify for the affordable but can't afford the market rate? What have communities tried to do to address that group?
That's a good question. I think there are a few different, on the rental side, maybe somebody else on the panel knows if there have been any. I know that there have been some structures and financing and project types that have been talked about. I don't know if any have been done where some are lower income units and then those graduate up to 80% to 100%. But I don't.
We have done, I believe, 2 projects, mixed income, between 85 and 90% market rate, 10 to 15% affordable, with the median income, I think, somewhere between that gap, that missing middle, somewhere between 70 to 80%. What I do think is interesting, and I have real respect for what you both do, truly, because it's incredibly difficult policy and finance decisions. But it is interesting. I was having a discussion with a housing administrator that actually came out of Atlanta, and he was just shocked at the state of California that we have this tendency, in front of the social equity side of it, that you have 100% market rate and you have 100% affordable, and that the two shall not meet. And that past legacy has created so many problems. So I think he was kind of happy, I think might be, and he was saying out of Atlanta and other locations that primarily how they address their affordable housing is in mixed income environments. You create an opportunity for the equity side of it where folks can see other folks with higher education, higher wages. It's aspirational living for them. There's modeling going on, and I think one of the women actually in the Santa Clara video actually alluded to it. Her happiest day will be when she can give up her voucher to someone else. That to me is truly, at the end of the day, wouldn't that be so successessul?
Yeah, there's a huge appetite right now to try to figure out ways to do more of the moderate.
Yes.
Yeah. And so some of the really exciting things.
Yeah.
So in San Mateo County, both the city of Burlingame and the city of San Mateo, and here in Santa Clara, Mountain View is looking at this, where they're looking at their availability of public land, and they're trying to figure out how to put that land towards what they really want for their community. So in that case, they said they have these surface parking lots. So downtown Burlingame, it has one of the most vibrant commercial strips in the valley. And there's downtown parking there that is incredibly valuable land, but it's surface parking, very inefficient use. So they put out a request for proposals that said replace all the public parking. In fact, it'd be great if you could add a bit. But show us plans where you could develop as much affordable housing as possible, and we'd love to see some moderate, get past just that federal cap of 60, but try to go up to 120% of area median, 120,000 a year for a family of 4, and by putting the value of that land to use. And they got a lot of proposals that were much more heavily mixed. So it might be a third or 2/3 the low-income housing tax credit type that I'm doing, but then we figured out ways to do some moderate as well. San Mateo is doing the same thing. Mountain View is looking at the same thing. It can be a way to take some more control about what you really want as a community. If you look at the assets that you own as a community and put them in the game, but then say, but here's what we want. our needs. We want it to be specific to what our community needs are.
Okay, well, at this point, we're going to move to your questions. And so I have a series of questions. I'm going to take a quick look at them. Did you order them in any way? Okay. Okay. Let's see. Does building more housing supply result in reduced housing prices if we believe in laws of supply and demand? Panelists?
I'll take that one.
Okay.
Initially,
No,
I'm
go
sure
ahead.
everyone has a piece of this, but I think initially no, because I think we're in such a deficit, but I think at some point when we quit shoveling our way deeper and deeper into a hole and we start to fill up that hole with more housing, whether it's denser housing or not, I think that helps to offset that balance.
Yeah, I don't think as a region we're ever going to be a national average of affordability. I think that's a pipe dream, and I don't think we can. The state housing, rather the Legislative Analyst's Office did a report on housing affordability 2 years ago, and they estimate in order, for the folks in California who are housing challenged or spending ordinance amount of their monthly budget on housing, to get them to a place where they're spending, 30% of their income on housing or less, would require a $250 billion investment in housing. So we don't have that. We don't have the political will or the land or any other thing to build our way out of this problem. But we can, as Deana said, we can stop digging. We have enough of resources available to us to stabilize prices, to make things a little bit better, and we should do everything in our power to do that. I don't think we're ever going to be the most affordable place in the world, but I think we can do much better than we're currently doing.
Okay. What have you seen as best practices in other cities that you would believe would serve Cupertino well? And this is both for affordable and market rate housing. Matt?
Well, so affordable, I think that advanced planning is really important. So I think the only way you can get to affordable is to embrace density in some parts of your city. So if the requirements are too few units per acre on the land's just going to be too expensive. It's just not going to pencil. But again, being thoughtful about the conditions under which density works in your community, where you would like it to be, what are your design standards. So that advanced planning on the land use side is really important. To the extent you can raise some of your own funding sources, whether it's impact fees or supporting the county efforts or some of the state efforts for funds that could come in, the money's really important. And then the other is, again, looking at the assets that the city already owns. So I was just looking at our pipeline of 2,400 units at Mid-Penn, and I'd say 40% of it starts with some public land that a really motivated city owns. And it puts the city really in the driver's seat then to pick a partner and to work in a very engaged way to create the right thing that works for you as a community.
And I was listening too deeply to Matt's response. Could you repeat the question?
So the question is, what are the best practices in other cities that you would believe would serve Cupertino well as a market rate developer?
As a market rate developer, I think things that are important is moving towards, I think somewhat analogous, towards transportation, transit-oriented development, TOD development, and also employment-based development. That ability and proximity to be able to walk to jobs, again, it creates a vibrancy in the evening for retail and doing those type of things.
And cutting commuting.
Well, and cutting commuting, and it takes again, back to that very sexy CIP, capital infrastructure program. Ultimately, even at the city level, taking people off the street and taking commuters and cars off the streets helps with wear and tear, helps to lift that burden off of transportation. Neighborhoods live better. So I personally see real activation opportunities. I see other cities not running from those opportunities, running to those opportunities for transit-oriented and for housing proximate to employers.
Julie?
So to add to both of those things, in addition to both of those things, I think it would be great to be looking at other existing resources like single-family homes that exist, thinking about granny units, accessory dwelling units. Mountain View, San Jose is, well, I'm not sure how far San Jose is in the process, but also Palo Alto are making some changes in response to some state legislation that makes it more palatable to do those things, and that addresses a lot of issues. You don't have any land cost. If you're doing an ADU, you can probably probably not rent it for as much as a market rate unit. It diffuses into the community, so it's not one big thing.
I'm going to toot my own horn a little bit here. I helped write the ADU law that you're talking about.
Bravo. That was a softball.
Yeah. The Bay Area Council sponsored that legislation last year, SB 1069, and if you're a homeowner in Cupertino, it's now much easier and less expensive if you want to build a granny flat either in your backyard or repurpose some unused living space within your home and create a rental unit. We have an unusual situation in California, again, a product of Prop 13. I call folks Prop 13 prisoners who live in large homes, but they can't move and take the property tax hit by changing address. What ADUs do is help repurpose that unused living space. California has more unused bedrooms per capita than any other state except Utah. So we've got all this. The easiest way to solve a housing crisis is to use the assets you have available to you to do that. We have all this unused existing housing stock. There are 1.5 million single-family homes in the Bay Area. If just 10% of them built an ADU, we've solved this region's housing crisis. If you think 10% is not achievable, Vancouver in British Columbia, which is a similar kind of economy, 35% of homes in Vancouver have an ADU. So if we can really ramp up ADU production in your city, a lot of cities are really getting behind this as an idea. Oakland, Berkeley, American Canyon, San Francisco has a great guide on how to build an ADU. We're putting together a consumer guide and a workshop to help homeowners do this. That's one way of getting the city to support that. And we met your wonderful planning staff. We had dinner with them before the panel. You have a great planning team here in Cupertino. Having someone on that planning staff educated on how to get ADUs permitted by right, over the counter, so you can get building within a month of pulling papers, I think that would be a great way to add a lot of affordable by design housing in Cupertino.
And I would just add that to the extent that you have large properties which could support mixed uses, encourage that. Look at, I think you've heard from the panel that just putting housing there, commercial there, or market rate housing there, affordable there, by themselves is not as good as sort of mixing that all together. So to the extent that you have large commercial parcels that could support these mixed uses, it's the opportunity to plan for a good mix of housing, whether it's market rate and affordable, as well as commercial, retail, office, whatever the case might be. I'm also a big fan of linkage. And because what I did a lot in the city of San Francisco is I financed things, and I did get that project down from that 890 to lower than 800, because every penny I saved, I spent on another affordable housing project. But it does cost a lot. But you do need money to make affordable housing happen, and so one of the things that I strongly believe in is linkage fees. And San Francisco is one of the earliest cities, along with Boston, that had a office housing linkage fee for all those workers who were going to be supporting those office workers. That was the impact. And I'll disagree with my panelists on the linkage with the inclusionary program in San Francisco, but it is also a way of creating affordable housing, whether it's just the units within the development that are affordable, or the fee that's going to be used by your staff to leverage state and federal dollars to build more affordable housing. Okay, next question. Is there a healthy balance for different types of housing? Cupertino is presently 2/3 ownership and 1/3 rental. Should the city focus on creating more rental housing, since many of us have work here but cannot afford to own a home here?
Want me to go first, Matt?
Sure.
Okay. I'd say more of all of the above.
Okay.
I mean, that's an oversimplification, but really more density, more variety, more senior housing, more affordable, more market rate apartments against those transit nodes, I think can be very, very helpful to that.
You know, there's been a big shift since the 08 recession towards more rental housing nationally, and it's a big enough shift. So it's, you know, I think the national home ownership rate used to be about 68%. It's down to about 62 or 63%. So 6 or 7% on a base of 60. So a 10% shift nationally is a really big shift in a housing market. And I think a lot of the housing policy and research folks believe that's going to be a permanent shift, that particularly for younger households, the attitudes around home ownership have shifted some. You know, I think I grew up in Ohio. There was a lot of kind of mythology around ownership. And ownership has a lot of advantages, certainly in terms of wealth creation. And if any of you have been are homeowners and have been in this community for a long time, it's probably been the best investment you've ever made financially. So that's still true in a lot of communities, but I do think that attitudes are very, very different. And again, the affordability crisis is so great that there's a lot of folks who make very good incomes, but who aren't really realistically going to either be able to access the ownership market or choose to. And so I do think you need to keep an eye on your rental and try to plan for rental. And I think if you look at your own community of family and friends here, you might see that as well. It's just, you know, a lot of the longtime residents I talk to in the Valley, you know, talk about their kids and worry about whether their kids can be able to live here and what their future is going to be, and, you know, whether neighbors can stay by them. And rental just creates a lot more flexibility generally in terms of cost.
I would add one thing, the home builder in me. I do think that there's a lot of psychographics for the first-time home buyers now, that 26 to 34 that traditionally are delaying marriage or delaying children or may have no children. There's some psychographics, I think, that are really relevant to that generation. They saw so much, not here, outside of this particular community in the Bay Area, just psychologically scarred by mortgages. They no longer, I'm from Idaho, you're from Ohio, is that we believed in the American dream. And so the American dream, I think, is in transition in California. And it's not so much sometimes, I think, that people don't want to buy a home. They can no longer dream the dream. Right? I mean, that's very important to think about. They can't dream the dream. And so ultimately we'll have to decide, do they dream the dream somewhere else? Right? If and when, if ever, there's children and school. You know, school impacts into do those kind of things, but part of it is there's a migration for employment and this ongoing flexibility. Everyone's now their own CEO of their job and recognize they may only be at one location for 3 years and somewhere else, and so the home ownership burden and amortizing those costs is different. But I think that there is a lot of psychological damage around owning homes, and we have to think about, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us? And I would tell you, I was a product of a single parent. I lived in all sorts of housing, and we had a home. We had all of those type of things. And so homes can be apartments, they can be garages, they can be ADA or ADU or accessory dwelling units, they can be single family homes, they can be a lot of those kind of things. But when people no longer dream the dream, they don't even dream the dream because they can never have it. I think long-term, those have real policy implications for us.
So Julie, you're reacting to not dreaming the dream.
So I totally agree that it's both. Both are very important. We should be focusing on both. But I think it's delayed for this generation.
Dream delayed, not dream denied.
Yeah, and I think eventually people who are a generation that is happy renting or fine renting right now, it's not always going to be that way. They're going to settle down, they're going to have children, and if we're not creating places for them to have an opportunity to buy into their community, invest in their community, stabilize their housing cost. Once you buy a house, you may be paying a mortgage, but you're paying the same mortgage sustain for 30 years if you're getting a 30-year fixed
You know,
mortgage.
I do both sides of development. I both rent. We have rental components, and we have a home building development arm, you know, for more than 30 years. So I definitely agree with that. I don't believe it's a dream denied. I think it is a dream delayed. But if we don't start to develop more housing choices for home ownership, density, all sorts of things, and likely probably smaller homes and smaller homes for smaller families, that dream could be denied.
And they will go.
They will.
They will go.
In a heartbeat.
I have the job I have at the Housing Trust. I've been at the Housing Trust for 7 years in many different jobs, but I have the job I have because the person who had it before me had the ability to pick up. She's part of the missing middle. She had the ability to pick up and move. This whole vote with your feet thing, she left and went to Las Vegas. And I have many friends who are doing that, and I think we're just going to see that more. And if it gets harder for companies to recruit, I think this idea of decline in home value, sure, you know, eventually building housing, you're going to increase supply, you'll bring down the price a little bit, but what's really going to tank the price is if we not only have a job creation stop in this region, if we have people taking their jobs elsewhere.
Right.
I mean, all of these companies, Apple has locations in Austin, in lots of other, Ireland. I mean, how did you put it? Silicon Valley will always exist somewhere, but it doesn't have to be Silicon Valley.
Yeah, it will always exist. It just doesn't have to be here. And I mean, I just so the data from the question is, you know, Cupertino's 2/3 ownership, 1/3 rental. That actually reflects, as Matt said, more closely to the national average. California is about to become a majority renter state. I don't know. I'm not a demographer or a social scientist. I don't know if that's good for the long-term economic well-being of California, particularly if you look at most people use their home, and you know, you've all seen the retirement savings data. You know, very few of us have enough money socked away to retire. Most of us use the equity in our homes as you know, as our safety net for when we retire. And if 50% of the state are renters, and I mean, I would argue that we're in such a dire shortage of housing that we're condemning people who would want to have that dream of ownership to being permanent renters, and they will never have the opportunity to build equity and get that American dream of owning their own home. So I think again to what Deana said at the outset, we need more of both. We need more rental so that young people coming out of college and people who have challenges in life can find a safe, secure, affordable place to live. But then we also need more market rate for sale product so that when they have established themselves in life, they don't have to move to Texas or they don't have to move to Raleigh-Durham or anywhere else. They can stay here where they were born, where their families are, and they can be successful. I think so we need more of both.
So when a city is built out and there are no more parcels of land available, what do you do next?
Well, the whole idea of a city being built out, I sort of question. So, I think of cities as living places that are always evolving and changing. So that you aren't going to probably recall, but the last slide I showed you was a senior development, 253 units in Mountain View, right off Middlefield Road. It had 153 existing units that had been built in the 1970s with some old HUD programs that we bought. And we were able to add 103 units by intensifying the density on the site. And it's still probably, 35, 40 units to the acre. It's not that dense. There's, I think, 110 heritage trees still on the site. So when you think your city's built out, take the challenge of driving around and asking yourself where there are underutilized parcels that can be used in better ways, right? So the another one I showed was on Fair Oaks Boulevard in Sunnyvale, large senior development. I said was next to a health clinic. So that health clinic had a 16,000 square foot building with a massive surface parking lot. So they tore it down. They built a 4-story health clinic next to it. They were going to repave the parking lot. And when we went in and said, well, what if we built you a little, garage in the back and you park there and you let us build senior housing right next to it? that, by the way, has a homeless set aside that can use some of the services in the new public health clinic. So there are countless opportunities. If you drive up and down the El Camino, there's, from one end of the valley to the other, there's all these pockets of really great, intense use, but in between those are just these deserts of wow, that building's been there forever, and look at all that parking. And what are they really using that for, right? So there's always ways to re-intensify the use in a thoughtful way. A lot of times that new use is denser, but frankly a much healthier, better use for the community.
I 10,000% agree with you. And I want to come to your follow-up series on transportation, because I actually think that's a really forward-leaning discussion between car sharing and less car ownership and doing all of those type of things. What the heck are we as a state going to do with all of this parking? But in the interim, we're still required to work with city, unless we have a state density bonus, and that's a concession that we're asking for, to still build a project that's based upon kind of older ideology related to parking. So we end up building all of this. How do we reuse that and kind of lean forward to be able to get to a place to say, what do we do with this in the future? What does that look like as we all start to share cars more and more and more? 14, 15, 16-year-old kids, they don't even want to go out and get their driver's permit. So I think that's a very important question to say, what do we do with leftover spaces? Because I agree with you. There are plenty of opportunities to be able to reinvent yourself. Your city, San Francisco, is a perfect example of that. And so good for you for going back, because a lot of your growth actually was born out of looking at those exact same type of situations.
Old railroad yards that became one-story warehouses, then now, the second campus of the University of California in San Francisco. So, reuse, adapt, reuse.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier there are a lot of urban myths around housing and planning, and I think the built-out myth is absolutely one of them, and Matt explained it perfectly. An analogy I used earlier is about, we're trying to rebuild this plane as we fly, and that's one of the hardest things to do about adaptive reuse of existing parcels of land that have low quality uses on them. I mean, you drive up Deanza to come here to City Hall, and there's some great projects, high density, and then there's other parcels that are, strip malls that are really sort of at the end of their lives. They have, Amazon is sort of putting the strip mall out of business. I mean, I don't know if your house is like mine, a cardboard box arrives every day. And so people shop in different ways. So those suburban strip malls that were auto-dependent will have to be redeveloped, and we'll have to think of higher and better uses for those parcels of land. And as Deana also correctly pointed out, young people are foregoing car ownership at rates that, for our generation, my generation certainly, that 16, 17 years old, you were rushing to DMV to get your license. Not so anymore. Young people do not want the burden of a car payment or trying to find somewhere to park. They're using car share and Uber and Lyft and all sorts of alternate transportation modes. So we're grossly overparked as a society. So we need to find imaginative ways to take all of that surface parking and reuse it for higher and better uses. I would argue, and I think everybody on this panel would argue, that housing is probably the best, highest and best use for all of that supposedly developed land.
Yeah, interestingly enough, SACOG, which is the Sacramento-based organization, is actually headed to Denver, I think, in the middle of September, looking at that specific issue about how are different cities, again, running to, not running from, reusing retail and strip centers, and you drive by and you're like, gosh, that's a lot of parking and doing those type of things. Is there ability to add senior housing or to intensify use and to do some of those type of things and still work within the community standards? So I completely agree. Well, we're more the same, I think, than we are different.
Well, and just one of the things that we did in San Francisco, we needed to build a new library. In one of our new neighborhoods called Mission Bay, and we encouraged the head librarian to build it as part of an affordable housing development. So we have this wonderful mixed-use development as a senior development by one of Matt's colleagues that has both an adult day center, a senior center, a library, and neighborhood retail. And it really helped create a center for this new neighborhood that was being converted from old warehouses into, basically the residential and offices related to biotech and the university overall. So think about how co-locating of public facilities, this is the whole question that Matt raised about public lands. Can we, have a double bottom line in the use of that to utilize that for a public purpose as well as an additional public purpose in terms of housing above. So
can I add something?
Sure,
to that also?
absolutely.
I'm so sorry. I'm so invigorated by this conversation. You folks are totally tapped out, but I think part of that though too is intensification of use, not just in urban centers, but the whole suburban urban experience. I don't think cool projects should just be reserved for urban San Francisco.
Yeah.
And so I think that there are opportunities for evocative, really community-based design that are still intensive, that still take those best practices from urban locations and put them and adapt them into a suburban experience. There are regionally from Sacramento to San Diego to South and East Bay, there are many opportunities to be able to explore that.
I think actually, I live in Contra Costa County, and I think it's largely suburban bedroom community, and some of the best projects, infill, multifamily projects that have gone up in the last decade have been in places like Walnut Creek and Lafayette, which for decades were resistant to housing, particularly a place like Lafayette. It's a very wealthy suburban community. They went through this process and had these conversations with themselves. And if you go to Lafayette today, it's a very different place than it was 15, 20 years ago. There's a lot more, particularly senior housing in downtown Lafayette, that's walkable, adjacent to services. And the homes that those seniors previously lived in are now occupied by families with kids. So it's if we build that type of housing, we create a more functional, rational housing market overall.
Can I get in on this too?
Absolutely, jump on in.
I think the conversations like are happening in the speaker series and are really helpful in starting the community to think about this, because I think what's really going to drive change is if people in the community walk, when you're walking and you're driving, look at your built environment not for what it is, but for what it could be. Just because that's always been a strip mall on that corner doesn't mean it always has to be a strip mall on that corner. And maybe you start imagining it as something else and something that you would like to see in your community. And so it's not just about what's fixed.
Well, we're going to have to wrap up very, very soon. And so I'm going to give the panelists an opportunity. This is not on the script. So the city staff is going, what is he doing? But I want you to give the folks of citizens of Cupertino some advice. As a housing professional, what would your last words to them? What would your advice be as they move forward? We'll start with Matt.
Well, I think something I've tried to hit on is, and you're demonstrating it by being here, is to be engaged. And I think that you have the answers to the questions related to development. I think it's a matter of engaging with your city staff and being part of the process so that your values and your needs and the reflection of the community are incorporated into what happens in the community. So Olson was talking about, we all spend a lot of time at planning commission meetings and city council meetings, and I want those meetings to be packed, not empty. I think some developers go in there, hoping to just kind of get in and get out, but it's really the community engagement that makes a lot of the communities I showed you, great communities. And so, taking that time to be engaged, I think helps it be a better product and one that meets your community needs.
Okay. Julie?
Start from a place of, if not yes, like maybe.
Okay.
To follow up kind of from what they're both saying, tonight or tomorrow or this weekend by Sunday, knock on one of your neighbor's doors and talk to them about this. You all are, believe it or not, your thought leaders of your community. You're here on a Thursday night, you devoted this time to be able to do this. change, don't change, but take something away from this so that you're not engaging either with city staff or with your electeds, and you're not having a monologue, you're having a dialogue. So I would encourage you just to expand upon this. You have a group of 5 of us sitting up here kind of telling you what our opinions are. You all should be having that deeper discussion. Get to know your neighbors more. So many of us don't know our neighbors now, and go and knock on somebody's door. I would highly encourage that.
I think the best job in the world where I go to work every day. I get to mix with some of the smartest, most innovative, imaginative people you have ever met. The people who have created this economy in the Bay Area. And this economy is not just designing apps and computer video games. Here in the Bay Area, we are going to cure cancer in our lifetimes.
I love that.
If we let it happen. It's not going to be cured here if Genentech can't be here, if UCSF can't get the best PhD candidates and the best researchers to come here. And they can't right now because the housing prices are so high. We have the ability here in the Bay Area to address and solve the climate change crisis of our generation. We're creating the cleanest, greenest energy in the world. We can solve that problem if we let it happen. We can stop traffic fatalities here in the Bay Area. We have all of the major companies in the world that are working on vehicle autonomy and vehicle safety that will stop traffic fatalities in our lifetime if we let it happen. There's a company in Richmond, in Contra Costa County, that has invented a suit that will allow paraplegics to walk. They're finalizing and perfecting that technology, and they will be able to allow paraplegics to walk if we let it happen. That's an Irish company. I'm plugging Ireland. I'm from Ireland. But they came here because it's the epicenter of world technology. We need to continue to encourage that and let that happen. The way we do it is to allow more people to come here and live here and share in this amazing ecosystem that this generation created. And congratulations, you did it. But we've got to perpetuate it and let it continue to grow. And that means more housing.
Okay. On that note, I'd like to have you thank our wonderful panelists, and that ends tonight's session, but it doesn't end your learning. Get the facts, learn more about what you can do, and continue to talk to the city staff if you have further questions about tonight's panel or anything else that you heard tonight. Thank you very much for being here.